Picture this. You walk into a grocery store in 2025, grab a loaf of bread, and pay $4.50. Nothing unusual, right? Just another day, another purchase. But here's what nobody tells you. That same loaf cost about $1.30 in 2015. In just 10 years, the price tripled. Your dollar lost 2/3 of its power to buy bread. And here's the thing that should terrify you. You probably didn't even notice it happening. Now, before you think this is just another video complaining about prices going up, I need you to understand something far more disturbing. This isn't about inflation. Not really. This is about the greatest theft in human history. One that's happening right now, in broad daylight, with your full consent. Except you never actually consented to it. Let me take you back to Germany, 1923. People carried money in wheelbarrows. Not because they were rich, but because a loaf of bread cost billions of marks. You've probably seen those photographs. Children playing with stacks of worthless banknotes like building blocks. Women using cash to light their stoves because it was cheaper than buying firewood. But here's what those history books don't tell you. By the time Germans were pushing wheelbarrows full of cash, they'd already been robbed. The theft didn't happen when prices exploded. It happened years earlier, silently, gradually, invisibly, just like it's happening to you right now. The question isn't whether you're being robbed. The question is, who's robbing you? How much have they already taken? And why can't you see it happening? Let me tell you what inflation actually is, because everything you've been told is a lie. They tell you inflation is rising prices. Your economics textbook says it. The news anchors repeat it. Even your favorite financial gurus call it that. But that's not what inflation is. That's just the symptom. Inflation is the decline in the purchasing power of your money. It's not that bread is getting more expensive. It's that your dollar is becoming worthless. Think about that distinction, because it changes everything. When they say prices are rising, they make it sound like it's the store owner's fault, or the supply chain's fault, or corporate greed. They point fingers at everyone except the real culprit. But when you understand that inflation is your money losing value, suddenly there's only one question that matters. Who controls the money? Let me show you something that'll make your blood run cold. In 2008, the M2 money supply in the United States, that's basically all the cash, checking accounts, and easily accessible money in the economy, stood at approximately $8 trillion. Today, in 2025, that number has exploded to nearly $48 trillion. That's a six-fold increase, 6 times more dollars floating around the economy. Now, did the American economy produce 6 times more goods and services? Did we become 6 times more productive? Did the GDP multiply by 6? No. Real GDP grew by roughly 1.6 times during that same period. Do the math. 6 times more money chasing 1.6 times more goods. What do you think happens? Every single dollar you own just lost a massive chunk of its value. Not because you spent it poorly, not because you made bad choices, but because someone, somewhere, decided to create trillions of new dollars out of thin air, and your share of the economic pie just got diluted. It's like if you own 10% of a company with 100 shares, and then someone issued 500 more shares without asking you. You still have your 10 shares, but now you own less than 2% of the company. Your ownership just got destroyed, legally, silently, and without your permission. This is inflation, and it's not an accident. It's not a natural economic phenomenon. It's a policy choice, a deliberate action, a system designed to transfer wealth from you to someone else. But who and why? Let me introduce you to the real architects of this silent robbery. Central banks. The Federal Reserve in the United States, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England, the Bank of Japan. These institutions have more power over your financial future than any politician, any corporation, or any law. And here's the terrifying part. You didn't elect them. You can't vote them out. And they operate with almost zero accountability to you. Since 2008, these institutions have engaged in what they call quantitative easing. Sounds technical, right? Sounds sophisticated, like something only experts could understand. Let me translate it for you. They printed trillions of dollars. The Federal Reserve alone created over $4 trillion through QE programs between 2008 and 2014. Then they did it again during the pandemic, another $4.5 trillion between 2020 and 2022. We're talking about nearly $9 trillion created out of nothing, but they'll tell you this was necessary. They'll say they were saving the economy, fighting unemployment, preventing deflation. ensuring financial stability. They use these noble-sounding justifications, and most people nod along because who wants to be against saving the economy? But here's what they're really doing. They're redistributing wealth, massively, systematically, and they're redistributing it from you to someone else. See, when the central bank creates new money, it doesn't drop it from helicopters evenly across the country. It doesn't deposit equal amounts into everyone's bank account. No, it funnels that money through very specific channels. First, it goes to banks, major financial institutions. Then it flows to large corporations that can borrow at artificially low interest rates. Then it goes to asset owners, people who own stocks, real estate, bonds. The people who are already wealthy. This is called the Cantillon effect, named after an 18th century economist who figured this out centuries ago. The people closest to the money creation benefit first and most. By the time that new money trickles down to average workers in the form of wages, if it ever does, prices have already risen. The purchasing power is already gone. So let me make this crystal clear. When the Fed prints money, asset prices soar. Stock markets hit record highs. Real estate becomes unaffordable. The wealthy get wealthier, not because they're smarter or work harder, but because they own assets that inflate in nominal value with the money supply. Meanwhile, you, the person who works for wages, who saves in a bank account, who doesn't own a stock portfolio or investment properties, you get destroyed. Your savings lose value every single day. Your wages can't keep up. That retirement fund you've been building, it's being silently eroded while you sleep. This isn't capitalism. This isn't a free market. This is a rigged game where the rules are written by the people who benefit from your loss. And the most disturbing part, they're doing it in the name of helping you. Let me tell you about Dorothy Richardson. She's not a real person, but she represents millions of real people whose stories nobody tells. Dorothy was born in 1935. She graduated high school in 1953, got a job as a secretary, married a factory worker named Frank. They did everything right. They believed in the American dream. They worked hard, lived modestly, and saved diligently. In 1965, when Dorothy was 30, she and Frank had managed to save $10,000, a substantial sum back then. They put it in a savings account, earning a modest interest rate. They figured that by the time they retired in 2000, that money, plus their continued savings and Social Security, would give them a comfortable retirement. Let me show you what actually happened to Dorothy's money. In 1965, $10,000 had serious purchasing power. You could buy a modest house in many American cities for $15,000. A new car cost about $2,500. A gallon of gas cost 30 cents. A loaf of bread cost 21 cents. By 1980, just 15 years later, that $10,000 could buy you far less. The house that cost $15,000 now costs $76,000. The car that cost $2,500 now costs $7,200. Gas had jumped to $1.19 per gallon. Bread cost 50 cents. By the time Dorothy retired in 2000, her $10,000, even with modest interest, had lost approximately 80% of its purchasing power. The house that cost $15,000 in 1965 now costs $170,000. That new car? $22,000. Gas? $1.50. Bread? $1.70. Dorothy and Frank did everything they were told to do. They saved. They were responsible. They didn't splurge. They didn't gamble. They didn't make risky investments. And they were robbed, systematically, over 35 years, by inflation. Now multiply Dorothy's story by millions. Tens of millions of Americans who saved for retirement between the 1960s and 1990s, only to discover their nest egg had been hollowed out by monetary policy they didn't understand and couldn't control. These are the invisible victims of inflation, the people who trusted the system, who played by the rules, who believed that if they just worked hard and saved, they'd be okay. They weren't okay, and nobody compensated them. Nobody apologized to them. In fact, most of them didn't even understand what had happened. They just knew, somehow, that their money didn't go as far as it should have. That retirement was harder than their parents said it would be. That something had gone wrong, but they couldn't quite put their finger on what. Now let me show you the other side of this equation. In 1982, Forbes published its first list of the 400 richest Americans. The combined net worth of everyone on that list was $92 billion. The richest person, Daniel Ludwig, was worth $2 billion. By 2025, The combined net worth of the Forbes 400 has exploded to approximately $4.5 trillion. That's nearly a 50-fold increase. Did America's economy grow 50 times? No. Did these people work 50 times harder? Unlikely. So what happened? Asset inflation, monetary expansion, cheap credit. The exact same money printing that destroyed Dorothy's savings created fortunes for people who owned assets. If you owned stocks, your wealth multiplied as the Fed pumped trillions into financial markets. If you owned real estate, your properties soared in value as cheap money flooded into housing. If you owned a business, you could borrow millions at near zero interest rates to expand and dominate your competition. The same system that robbed the savers enriched the asset owners. This isn't a coincidence. This is the design. This is how the system works. Central banks don't create inflation to hurt billionaires. They create inflation knowing full well it transfers wealth from people who hold cash to people who hold assets. And here's the most important part. This isn't about vilifying wealthy people. Many of them earned their success through genuine innovation, hard work, and risk-taking. But the system massively amplified their gains while simultaneously destroying the middle class's purchasing power. The game is rigged, and Dorothy never stood a chance. Now here's where this story gets truly disturbing, because at least with regular taxes, you get to vote. If Congress wants to raise income tax from 25% to 30%, there's a debate. There are hearings. There are votes. You can call your representative. You can protest. You can vote them out in the next election. There's a process. There's accountability. There's transparency. But inflation? Inflation is a tax without representation. Think about that. The American Revolution was fought over taxation without representation. No taxation without representation was the rallying cry that built a nation. The idea that you shouldn't be forced to give up your wealth without having a say in the matter was considered a fundamental human right. Yet here we are, 250 years later, and the largest wealth transfer in human history is happening without a single vote in Congress. Without a single law being passed. Without any democratic process whatsoever. The Federal Reserve is not elected. When Jerome Powell decides to create $3 trillion, he doesn't need to ask you. He doesn't need congressional approval. He just does it. And you lose purchasing power instantly. Let me put this in concrete terms. According to various economic analyses, since 2008, the real purchasing power of savings held in cash or low-yield savings accounts in developed countries has declined by approximately 50 to 70%, depending on the country and the specific time period measured. That means if you had $100,000 in savings in 2008, and you just kept it in a regular savings account earning minimal interest, the real value of that money, what it can actually buy, is now somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000. You didn't spend it. You didn't lose it in a bad investment. You didn't get scammed. You simply held onto your own money, and you lost half of it anyway. This is a 50 to 70% tax on your savings, except it's not called a tax. It's called monetary policy. It's called quantitative easing. It's called necessary stimulus, and you never got to vote on it. Imagine if Congress tried to pass a law that said, we're going to take 50% of everyone's savings over the next 15 years. There would be riots. There would be protests. Politicians would be thrown out of office. The law would never pass. But that's exactly what happened, just through a different mechanism. A mechanism that most people don't understand. A mechanism that operates in the shadows, using technical language and complex financial instruments that obscure what's really happening. This is the silent tax. And it's the most effective tax ever created, because the victims don't even realize they're being robbed. Here's what should terrify you most. This isn't new. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and it always ends the same way. We started this video talking about Weimar Germany in 1923, but that's just the most famous example. Let's look at the pattern. Rome, 3rd century AD. The emperors needed money to pay soldiers, fund wars, maintain the empire. So they did something clever. They started diluting the silver content in their coins. A coin that used to be 95% silver gradually became 90%, then 80%, then 50%. By the end of the crisis, Roman coins contained less than 5% silver. The emperors created more money, but they didn't create more value. Prices exploded. The currency collapsed. The empire crumbled. Fast forward to France, 1790s. The revolutionary government needed money. So they created a new paper currency called the assignat, backed by confiscated church lands. They promised to be responsible. They promised limited issuance. Within 4 years, they'd printed so many assignats that the currency became worthless. Bread riots erupted, economic chaos reigned. Napoleon eventually rose to power in the aftermath. Hungary, 1946. The worst hyperinflation in recorded history. Prices were doubling every 15 hours at the peak. The government created a new denomination, the 100 quintillion pengo note. That's a one with 20 zeros after it. Zimbabwe, 2008. You could be a trillionaire and still not afford bread. The government printed a $100 trillion note, and it was worthless. Venezuela, 2016 to 2019. A modern, oil-rich nation with the largest proven oil reserves on Earth descended into hyperinflation. People lost 99.99% of their savings. Doctors and engineers were digging through trash to find food. See the pattern? Every single time, the same story. 1. Government or central authority needs money too. Instead of raising taxes, politically unpopular, they print money. 3. They promise it's temporary, necessary, controlled. 4. The money printing accelerates. 5. Prices explode. 6. Savings are wiped out. 7. Social chaos follows. 8. The people who saw it coming and held assets survive. The savers are destroyed. And here's the thing, we're not talking about ancient history. Venezuela was 7 years ago. We're watching this happen in real time in countries like Argentina and Turkey right now. But you're probably thinking, sure, but that's different. That's failed states, corrupt governments, unstable regimes. That can't happen in America or Europe or other developed nations. Really? Let me show you something. The United States national debt in 2008 was about $10 trillion. Today, it's $36 trillion. It has more than tripled in less than 20 years. And it's accelerating. The only way to service this debt without default is to inflate it away, to make the debt smaller in real terms by making the dollar worth less. This is exactly what's happening. Every major central bank in the developed world has the same problem. Massive debt, aging populations, unfunded liabilities. And they're all using the same solution. Print money and hope inflation reduces the real burden of the debt. You are living through the early stages of the same pattern that has destroyed currencies throughout history. The only difference is the speed and the scale. In Rome, it took 2 centuries. In Weimar Germany, it took 4 years. In Venezuela, it took 3 years. How long do we have? Nobody knows, but the trajectory is clear. And every single time in history this has happened, the people who figured it out early protected themselves. The people who didn't lost everything. So what do you do with this information? Let me give you 3 takeaways that might save your financial future. First, understand that cash is not safe. For 100 years, we've been taught that saving money is responsible. That keeping cash in the bank is the smart, conservative choice. But in an inflationary environment, especially one with aggressive monetary expansion, cash is the riskiest asset you can hold. It's guaranteed to lose value. Your savings account isn't preserving your wealth, it's slowly destroying it. Second, realize that this system benefits asset owners. The wealthy stay wealthy not because they save more money, but because they understand this game. They don't hold cash, they hold assets. Real estate, stocks, businesses, commodities, things that maintain or increase their value as the currency debases. The middle class works for wages and saves in currency. The wealthy own assets that appreciate with inflation. This is why the wealth gap keeps growing, not because of capitalism, but because of monetary policy. Third, demand transparency and accountability. This system continues because most people don't understand it. The more people who understand how inflation actually works, how it's created, who benefits, who suffers, the harder it becomes for central banks to operate in the shadows. Financial literacy isn't just about personal wealth, it's about democratic accountability. When citizens understand monetary policy, politicians and central bankers can't hide behind technical jargon. Here's the warning I'll leave you with. Every empire that has debased its currency has collapsed. Every single one, no exceptions. The timeline varies, but the outcome is always the same. We are currently witnessing the largest monetary expansion in human history. More money has been created in the last 15 years than in the previous century combined. Maybe this time is different. Maybe modern central banks have figured out how to print unlimited money without consequences. Maybe we've transcended the economic laws that governed every previous civilization. But I wouldn't bet your life savings on it. The silent tax is still running. Every day you hold cash, you're paying it. Every day the central banks expand the money supply, you're getting poorer, even if your account balance stays the same. The question isn't whether you're being robbed anymore. You are. The question is, what are you going to do about it? If this video opened your eyes to how money actually works, subscribe to this channel because we're going to keep pulling back the curtain on the systems that control your financial future. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next investigation. And if you found this valuable, share it. Because the only way this system changes is if enough people understand what's really happening. The theft continues, but now you can see it. Thanks for watching. Now go protect yourself.